Hi, and welcome to today's Federal Youth Network Virtual Learning Series. Bienvenue à la série d'apprentissage virtuel du réseau des jeunes fonctionnaires fédéraux. Today we'll have an interesting session on the Resilience Long Game, bouncing back again and again and again. Now that we're into 6 months of pandemic reality, I think it's a great time for us to have this session. And on with us today are Alia Danani Issa and Paul Keller. Before we get started, I would like to mention I'm joining you from Ottawa. Ottawa is the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people. I would also like to recognize that many of you are participating from other traditional territories all over the country. As I mentioned on our sessions last week, September 13th marked the 13th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, or the UNDRIP, which was adopted by the General Assembly on Thursday, the 13th of September, 2017. Marcella will share the link to that if you'd like further information to understand sort of what changes were put in place based on that declaration in 2007. Today's session will be bilingual, so we'll be speaking in English and French. Alors, on va parler en anglais puis en français. Et puis, vous pouvez poser les questions dans la langue de votre choix, alors soit en anglais ou en français, et utiliser la fonction questions et réponses, qui est sur votre écran comme Q et A. So you can ask questions to Paul and Alia using the Q&A function or also in the chat space. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Alia and Paul to introduce themselves and start with their presentation. So thanks very much for joining us today, everyone. Merci à tous.
Thanks, Josh. I just wanted to add that we were able to fortunately get a last-minute speaker as well. So I'd also like to introduce Pauline, if she wants to pop up on the screen as well. There we go. And we're going to do a bit of our intros first and then get right into it. So thank you all for joining us today. Today we're talking the Resilience Long Game, bouncing back again and again and again. And each of us is coming at this from a different experience in our lives and our journey, and we're all going to have a different journey. Like it says, it is a long game. So a little bit about us. So I've been with the for almost 12 years now. And I'm hearing an echo, so I don't know if that's me or if someone is unmuted. I go by she, her. So my name is Alia Danani Issa, and I'm coming to you also from Ottawa, which is unceded Algonquin territory. I've been doing work in the mental health space, mostly on the side of volunteering and crisis line counseling and, like the Royal Ottawa Hospital here. But I've always been passionate about it, and I do have my undergrad in psych. So even though I'm not able to use it in a professional capacity, so I'm in no ways, subject matter expert, I bring a bit of that intuition in the work that I do. And being part of FlexG has given me the opportunity to really be able to connect and tap into that and support others going through this, especially because everything sort of amplified and got started with the COVID-19 pandemic, of course, but I had been working from home before that, as many of the FlexGC members have, and this has been a really good time for us to be able to share our insights, which we're hoping to do today on resilience. I will pass it over to Paul, my co-FlexGC member.
Hi everyone, bonjour. Alors, je m'appelle Paul Keller, j'habite à Québec et je suis un chargé de projet au Lab d'innovation du Conseil fédéral du Québec. I'm a project manager at the Quebec Federal Council's Innovation Lab. I started out in the federal public service at the Canada Revenue Agency, where I was a complex case collections officer. And I was also an innovation ambassador for the Eastern Quebec Tax Services Office in Quebec City as well. I spent over 7 years there, and I was actually selected to manage the Beyond 2020 Innovation Fair in Quebec City. But that didn't work out exactly as planned because COVID happened. And so I eventually onboarded FlexGC last April, and I haven't looked back ever since. Somewhat like Alia, I am not a mental health expert. What I bring to the table is, my own experience and intuition, as Alia mentioned. But I'm pretty sure that today we'll be able to have a pretty good discussion along with Pauline on resilience. So we did have a few questions that we wanted to ask you today. We do want to give you some time to think about. I think I saw some answers in the chat already. So the first question that we had was, what is your definition of resilience? And this will take us to the next slide, please. So the dictionary...
Sorry, Paul, can we just do Pauline's intro first?
For sure, yes, for sure. Go ahead with Pauline's bio, and then I'll come back to you guys.
The floor is yours, Pauline.
Thanks, no worries. So I am very happy to be here joining you sort of last minute. So my name is Pauline Meunier. I am the new training and delivery specialist for the Mental Health Commission for their program, The Working Mind. The Working Mind First Responder and the Inquiring Mind, which is the post-secondary program. I come from paramedic services, and I have been a master trainer with the Commission for a number of years, teaching these programs and teaching folks how to facilitate it. As I said, I come from paramedic services. I spent 26 years in service there, and I think I did every job that there was to do, from frontline paramedic to dispatch. Eventually, I was involved as a union president for several years, and eventually changed to the management side. And my last assignment was as a paramedic chief in Southwest Ontario. So I am joining you today from okay internet connection. I've had some terrible trouble with that over the last 24 hours, but I'm at my home, which is in Muskoka. I am deep in the heart of cottage country, and I am very happy to be having this lovely view as we're talking with everyone today. So very, very happy to be here for this conversation.
Awesome, Pauline. Thank you. So these are the two questions that we're going to be wanting to ask you today. Now, take some time to think about it, but put your answers in the chat at any time in the language of your choice. We'll try to share some of those with the audience during the presentation. Now, the first question that we're asking is, what is your definition of resilience? And dictionary actually has two definitions. Fun fact. First one is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or toughness, which, is maybe the one that we're more familiar with. However, there's also another one that I find really interesting. It's in physics. And I find it to be a really interesting metaphor. It's the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape. So I have an example for you guys that I'd like to share, and it's with this stress ball right here, okay? When you compress the stress ball, what happens? It changes shape, right? As soon as you let go of the pressure, it comes back. So this stress ball is an extremely resilient individual, but sometimes we don't bounce back as fast. And sometimes we can actually change the shape of this ball, right? If the pressure is hard enough. And so I find that it's an interesting metaphor because, basically we're constantly evolving, constantly changing. And, our capacity to be resilient can change as well. And we're going to look at that during the presentation today. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Alia with the first of 5 pillars of resilience.
Thanks, Paul. So as Paul mentioned, resilience can come in different sort of ways depending on your personality. And it's not necessarily a personality trait. So we can all be resilient, but we may come at it differently. It may be easier for some than others. And when you begin to sort of learn the skills or the little tools and techniques to be able to manage that, it will really help you be more resilient when you're facing adversity. So there are sort of 5 buckets, if you will, that have kind of shaped how to be resilient. And when you are researching this stuff, there's different ways to articulate it. This particular icon comes from the Bounce Back Project, which will be linked at the end. But they all kind of center around the same ideas. And one of the first sort of steps or areas that they tell you to focus on is self-awareness, which is really important in sort of being able to identify and focus on you and understanding how you think, how you focus on yourself, how your emotions either do or don't align with, you know, other standards. There are sort of 2 areas when it comes to self-awareness. So internal and external. So the internal represents how clearly we see our own values, passions, aspirations, and how that fits with our environment and our reactions. This includes your thoughts, your feelings, your strengths, your weaknesses, and how you behave, and how that impact others. Self-awareness is also associated with higher job satisfaction, personal and social control, and it's negatively related to anxiety, stress, and depression. So that's when you have an internal sort of self-awareness focus. The external part of self-awareness comes with understanding how other people view us. So this is the outside in, right? So looking at the same factors as the internal, but research is showing that people who know how others see them are more skilled at showing empathy and taking others' perspectives. For leaders who see themselves as their employees do, their employees tend to have a better relationship with them. They feel more satisfied and they view them as more effective in general. Having self-awareness allows us to monitor these inner and external components. Our thoughts and feelings sort of come as signals, and developing that self-awareness allows us to be, you know, no longer swept away by the signals, but instead to sort of objectively and thoughtfully respond to them. Self-aware people understand their internal experience and their impact on the external experience of others. And this comes from positive psychology. So how do we become more self-aware? Well, there's a range of exercises that you can do. There are tests available online. There's self-consciousness wheel, journaling, introspection, you know, really taking a step back and trying to monitor sort of the things you're doing or how you're reacting when confronted with certain situations. And they're also helpful tools. So one thing that I find really helpful in sort of bringing to light and becoming more self-aware is something called the circle of control. So the circle of control comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly and Effective People, Powerful Lessons in Personal Change. And if you walk through this exercise, and if we had more time, I would really love to have done it with you, but I will go over it because I think it is something important that anyone can do at home. So you sort of start with the first step, which under the number 1 circle is you draw a circle. When you go through that exercise, through the step number 2, in the perimeter of the circle, you're listing all of the things that are concerning you, anything and everything, right? So you kind of jot it all down. You don't need to focus on what's written there. It's just for illustrative purposes. But the idea is, you know, anything from politics to the weather to childcare to you know, an urgent deadline of some sort to diet, whatever it is, right? After you've done that, you draw another circle in the middle, so that's the yellow one you see, and you start to look at the stuff that you had in your concerns and which ones you can move into the yellow circle that are things you have direct control over. So what can I do that can directly have control over this so I'm able to manage that? And you go through this exercise and you think of the solutions that you might have, right? Like, what can I change directly that will result in the outcome that I want to see? You've done
just one sec. We're getting a bit of feedback from your mic. Just had some users ask if you could move your mic closer. We're just getting a bit of static on the line a little bit.
Okay, let me know. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, sorry guys.
No worries. Thanks.
It could be because I'm trying to talk louder into a mic that's already probably doing its job. So maybe I'll talk normal. Anyway, so once you've put, is this good, by the way?
Yeah, it seems to be a bit better, yeah.
Perfect, thanks. So I'll just say that you then move it into this yellow circle, which is your circle of control. Then you have a few more that are kind of lingering around, and you start to look at how you have indirect control but can influence these things. So even though you can't take complete control over it, is there something else you can do that's sort of a detour or roundabout way of getting to it, right? And that's something you can influence or nudge. And you start to drag those, and that's kind of what you see in this number 4. And then finally, what you'll have in number 5 is you've gone through this process of basically seeing all the things you have no control over. So why worry about it, right? Park that aside. The things that you can control, and you can probably develop an action plan on how you're going to do that, and the things you have influence over, and again, how you can come to doing that. So this comes from, like I said, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and this is kind of how it looks in some of the research. So if you're looking for that, there are great sort of tips and tricks in there. The next part of the resilience buckets is mindfulness. And, you know, sometimes people ask what the difference is between self-awareness and mindfulness. Well, mindfulness is really the active and sort of open attention to your actions, to the present. Things like walking and actually looking and being aware of how you're taking that step, how your heel comes down to your toe, your breathing, all these little sort of in the moment factors, right? When you're mindful, you observe your thoughts, your feelings, and you don't judge whether they're good or bad. You're just kind of being, again, mindful, acknowledging that this is happening. And you're awakening to that experience. The thing with mindfulness is it allows you to be focused and intensely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment. There are many techniques you can do to practice mindfulness. Some involve breathing methods, guided imagery, meditation, all these sort of things that kind of reduce stress. And if you're spending too much time in your thoughts, you know, if you're planning things or trying to problem solve, or, you know, you have these negative emotions, you're feeling overwhelmed, it can be draining. So what the research says is that mindful people tend to cope better with those difficult thoughts and emotions without becoming overwhelmed or shutting down. Their ability to pause and observe the mind may help resist getting drawn into sort of the wallowing setbacks. So I mentioned there are a number of techniques you can do, including meditation. There are apps that help with this, or, you know, influencers you might find online. In a world right now where everything is virtual, there are probably many offerings of this sort of thing. Yoga is another one, breathing. But even things at home without needing any tools is things like setting intentions. So you can set an intention and ask yourself in the day, you know, how might I show up today to have the best impact? What quality of mind do I want to strengthen and develop? What do I need to take better care of myself? And this actually taps into another point on this. During difficult moments, how might I be more compassionate to others and myself? How might I feel more connected and fulfilled? So, you know, this is really a way of checking in with yourself. And then even setting an actual intention for the entire day. So, you know, today I will be kind to myself, or I will forgive myself, or I will be patient with others. I will stay grounded. I will have fun. I will persevere. I will eat well. Whatever you feel is important. And when you have that, and as I mentioned, one of them kind of links, and they all do link to each other, is the idea of self-care and checking in with yourself, right? So this checklist that you see is just a personal checklist. It's sort of how I walk through my own feelings of anxiety or feeling overwhelmed and trying to overcome that. So when I'm confronted with some of the situations I mentioned earlier, like obsessive thinking and really being in my head, I start to do a little check-in. So am I eating? You know, what am I eating? Am I sleeping? There's a lot of effect between, you know, the psychological factors that influence your physiology. And I go through this to figure out when and where things are happening. I start to monitor maybe if there's a pattern and when that happens, and is it always after I, you know, eat something or I haven't slept a certain number of hours or whatever it is. And this is also another good self-awareness activity, right? Because it's really sort of reflecting on what is causing you to feel certain ways. And again, that all links to the mindfulness and the self-awareness. And so how do we kind of foster this and help with it? We take care of ourselves, right? And so Oh, anyway, so self-care is one of the other pillars, which you'll see in the bubble. There's a quote that I've seen many times and I've shared in this other versions of this presentation where we talk about you got to nourish to flourish, right? And people who take care of themselves are basically valuing themselves and telling others that, you know, they know that they're important and they need to do what they need to feel important so that they can actually be more positive. You're not going to be useful to anyone else or be able to do the things that you're trying to do if you're not taking care of yourself. So it's a very important way of basically becoming resilient, right? You're able to overcome through feeding yourself. And I've said this before, if you've seen me at other presentations about the sort of airplane analogy, which I use a lot, and the idea that, you know, when you have the oxygen mask, instead of putting it on your, you know, the ones you're caring for on the plane, they always tell you to put it on yourself first. And that translates into this kind of thing where if you can't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to be positive, to overcome those barriers, to really give and drive that positive change you want to see in yourself if you're not feeling good, right? So yeah, so those are the three that I'm covering, and I will pass it over to Paul to explain the other two parts of these resilience pillars.
Awesome. Thanks, Alia. So we'll let the deck's going to show up in a few seconds. You might have seen it just a few seconds ago. Positive relationships is the fourth pillar. The fact is, positive relationships make us feel good, whether it be, you know, getting support or a tap on the back for a job well done, or offering recognition and support to the people you care about. We're truly social beings, and we need interaction with others. However, sometimes we can feel overwhelmed. And so when the people that we care about reach out to us, and you know, I've gone through this myself because I'm a pretty anxious person. When someone reaches out to us for help and you're already overwhelmed, you know, the reflex is kind of like self-survival. You feel that you don't have time to give to these people because you're already feeling, you know, overwhelmed by everything that's going on in your life. But ironically, helping people out can actually make you feel happy and fulfilled. And chances are that if you do find time for people, they'll be more inclined to find time for you as well. But obviously you have to manage your expectations, you know, and set your limits as well on what you're willing to give. I have a little story for you guys. It's actually something that happened this year with one of my friends named Guillaume. Guillaume has a vegetable farm, and he basically, you know, produces vegetables with no chemicals. But this year was really tough for him because he wasn't able to get the organic certification. And so when he showed up to grocery stores to sell his stuff, they were offering very little money for, you know, for a lot of effort, basically. And one day I was picking green beans at his house with my family, or at his farm with my family, and he's talking to me about this, and I see an opportunity to help him out because you can see that this guy was really under the weather with all this, and I took it upon myself to basically start distributing his vegetables in my part of town. And I know for a fact that at that particular time, Guillaume needed that, and he needed help from someone to come and, you know, give him a bit of a morale boost. And at the same time, while he got that, he got that help to be resilient. On my end, I got, you know, some nice feelings as well when, you know, he's showing me appreciation for what's going on, when people in the neighborhood are coming around and telling me how they appreciate the community aspect and stuff. And so basically, my point is, I'm feeling good. It helped out Guillaume. So there's sort of like these positive relationships that we have can definitely help us through these harder times, you know. And that will bring me into my next slide, which is basically the fifth pillar, which is purpose. Oh yes, and obviously right here we've got the fruit of our positive relationship, or should I rather say the vegetables of our positive relationship, hearty heart heart. So purpose. At the beginning, we asked you to tell us what gives you purpose. And for me, what gives me purpose is taking care of my family, supporting my colleagues, and making things better for the greater good. I'm a very creative person. I love to innovate, and that gives me purpose. And it's also what keeps me going when I take a hit. It's important to set realistic objectives. So if you do have a purpose or an objective, if your objective is too complex, too hard to overcome, then obviously you're setting yourself up for basically being discouraged and having to find the need to bounce back. Whereas if you set realistic expectations and things don't work out, then you won't go down so low. We were talking about the circle of control earlier. If I let's say for a particular subject that you don't agree with, there are different ways that you can help. You can become an activist, which is basically sacrificing a lot of yourself. You can also vote to have your point shown. So you basically decide the level of sacrifice that you're willing to give up, for that purpose. And one of the, you can go to the next slide. This is a quote that I like a lot. It's by Henry Ford, and it's, "Obstacles are those frightful things you see when you take your eyes off your goal." And so a good way to stay resilient is not to focus on those obstacles. As an entrepreneur, I've had projects where I produce music and music videos, and I can tell you that how I felt during my first project is not at all how I felt during my most recent, and that is entirely because I set realistic expectations. And so when I was looking for partners or looking for people to get involved in the project and it didn't work out, I didn't take it the same way as I did the first time, because I had come to accept, that people have other things to do, and etc. So basically my own expectations were decreased, and for that reason I didn't feel so under the weather when things didn't work out. So that's an interesting thing to have, purpose, whether it's taking care of your family or whatever, basically gives you the motivation to get out of a hole, is what we're looking for. So there you go. That's all I got on my end. We have some interesting resources here. Obviously, the Mental Health Commission of Canada, where Pauline is from, Center of Expertise on Mental Health, LifeSpeak. If you click on that link and you use the password Canada, there's you have access to a lot of resources. There's also really good TED Talk, 3 Secrets of Resilient People, and the Bounce Back Project that Alia mentioned as well. Now, Alia, Pauline, did you have some stuff that you wanted to, share with us? Things that weren't clear that you think we should pay more attention to?
I just wanted to kind of go back and reiterate some of the things that you folks have pulled together. It's a pretty long list of things and opportunities, and folks can use and do to be resilient. So it would be great if people could walk away from this and pick a couple to try and start building their own toolkit. The one thing, so let me just go back. For me, resilience is getting through whatever the challenge is, one foot in front of the other. But that also comes from the work that I used to do as a medic. There was never a give up, right? You just keep walking forward. But I have found over the years my purpose is changing, or at least how I can define that. So as I get older, I find that I am being drawn to connecting to myself in a more authentic way. So let me explain that. It wasn't until I fully committed to my own therapy that I started to understand that I really wasn't able to connect to my own feelings. And it makes me laugh to say that now, but as a first responder, I was very good at disconnecting from my feelings in order to service and help others. You have to do that as a first responder. But over time, if you don't take a moment and start reflecting and doing the work on the things that you've seen and the things that you've been exposed to, it can become a bit of a problem if you don't have the right kind of support. So one of the things in our programming that we teach it is around resilience, and the definition we use is from the American Psychological Association from a document called The Road to Resilience. And it goes on to say that the resilience is the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, significant sources of stress, and it means bouncing back, as we've talked about, from difficult experiences and stressful situations. But I'm very glad when you were using the analogy of the ball and the stress ball when you were squishing it, that it doesn't always come back to the shape that it was to begin with. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because we don't always talk about post-traumatic growth. We don't talk about what happens when you build skills in some of these things, when you build skill in resilience, when you build skill in helping others, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, you can definitely, somebody said in a class the other day that I was teaching, their definition of resiliency was bouncing forward. So growing from that, oh, look at this. Your moderator is fantastic. They are putting in all of these links as we're talking about them. So they talked about bouncing forward, which is my new definition of resilience, I have to say. There are so many resources out there for folks. And really, you just need to try and build your own toolbox and find what speaks to you. And I would encourage everyone who is in a well space or in a safe space right now mentally to start thinking about what their self-care toolkit essentially could look like. Because when you are in a dark place or when things do get challenging, it becomes much more difficult to reach out. It becomes much more difficult to keep walking forward. But I encourage everyone. I mean, last week was Suicide Prevention Awareness. You know, September 10th was Awareness Day worldwide, and that help is out there. And that if anyone is struggling right now who happens to be live listening to this, or who's watching this at a later date, if you're struggling, please reach out. Let someone know. Asking for help, in my opinion, is a very powerful act of bravery. And all of this around building resilience fits in with that. I would also like to add the links that you have there. There's some phenomenal resources there as well. I would like a little bit of a disclaimer on the Lucy Horn video, because she has some amazing things to say about resilience and really truly demonstrates the most powerful ones, but it comes at a price of tragedy for herself personally. And that might be difficult for some folks to watch. So just be gentle on yourself if you choose to watch that video. Give yourself permission not to watch it, because she talks about the loss of her own child. So just be gentle in that. But the things that she shares, the most powerful thing for me out of her talk was, would this help me? So looking at whatever is going on. So in what you folks were sharing around those positive relationships and those things that you can do for yourself, everything you can decide, is this something that is helpful for me? Whether it comes to like nutrition, at the beginning of the pandemic, I will fully confess, I ate a lot of chips and I had to decide, was this helpful for me? No, this was not helpful for me. So I had to let that go for a little while. So we can decide what is right for us and what is not okay for us, and give full permission to let those things go, to decide to choose things that are a benefit for us and let go of even relationships that are harmful for us, because you have to be your own advocate, right? You are the CEO of your life, so you get to decide what's in and what's out. So just to kind of reiterate some of those points, and really echoing all of those things, and the list of things are very powerful tools. When we think about how do we get through difficult situations from the point of resilience, there's lots of things we can do. Deep breathing, absolutely. It's so simple. Everyone has access to it. If there's one thing I could share with this group today, is a technique called box breathing. And it's where you would breathe in for 3 or 4 seconds, hold for 3 or 4 seconds, breathe out for 3 or 4 seconds, and hold, and then repeat that box. Because what that will do is, in a moment of crisis or in a moment where things are overwhelming, if you take a minute, 30 seconds, 60 seconds, 2 minutes, just that breathing technique alone will reduce your anxiety, it will reduce stress, and it will move you from that fight, flight, or freeze response into the mode of higher critical thinking. And I would also like to apologize for the group, because as a last minute speaker, I didn't know this was encouraged to be bilingual, and my grade 9 French is certainly not sufficient for this discussion. So I'm hoping that if anybody does have any questions in French, someone can help me translate it, because I'd love to be able to answer them. So, and happy to continue the discussion. What do you folks think is the most important thing? Like, as you two were building all of this information, what one thing stood out for each of you?
I feel like it gave me a process to kind of even reflect on my own experience, especially in the pandemic, because even though I've had this intuition and I generally view myself as a self-aware person, it wasn't until I took one of the tests that I was doing when I was building this presentation to get like a sense of the degree of how self-aware I am. And it was kind of a nice like moment of aha, right? And what I realized in that was, through the pandemic, I know you mentioned the TED Talk, about being about grief, but there's also a lot of these articles about how even going through the pandemic itself, a lot of us are grieving. You know, it's grieving the back to the before times, right, which we won't have anymore for, you know, an indeterminate period of time. So I love this idea that you mentioned about bouncing forward, because it is really applicable to how we're kind of moving today in a COVID-19 world and, you know, the foreseeable future. It's not going to be the same ever again, right? And that's not a bad thing. It's really testing the degree of resiliency you're in, and kind of forcing you to really check in and basically go through this process, which is grief. And with grief comes that resilience and that bouncing forward. So I really like how you put that, mention that, because I like the idea of forward looking, forward moving, and really being like a better version of yourself, if you will, which things like self-care and self-awareness and that mindfulness allow you to do. Sorry, I think you wanted to say something.
No, that's okay. No, grief it's an important note to touch on, because we are all grieving something, whether it is the literal loss of someone that we've lost to COVID-19, whether it's the loss of work, just the ability to move in the way that we moved before with people, you know, the loss of celebrating in the way that we used to celebrate. We are all grieving something, and I do think it's important to recognize that in this time. Absolutely true. There's, I'm not sure if it was you, but I remember a mention about happiness psychology, and I'm a huge fan of Sean Archer, who also has a TED Talk about happiness psychology, which is just, it's phenomenal. I love his work. And I think that kind of sets us up for success. And you know, as we're talking, I'm drawn to another, an author who, I'm trying to think of his name. He wrote The Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And that's a fantastic book. And it was the first book I had ever come across where I had to I had to set it down occasionally so I could process some of what he was sharing. And the beginning of the book, and I'm paraphrasing, but he starts off with the concept that life is difficult. And once you accept that, it becomes easier. And after that sentence, I think I had to put that book down for a couple of weeks because I really had to process what that actually meant. But it's very, very true. Life isn't easy. I mean, who says it should be, right? So, I mean, we have to work towards building our own strengths in order to have the best experience we can have. I mean, we've only got one shot, right? So we might as well have fun when we're doing it. And all of that leads to deciding what's important for you and how do we manage the difficulties that come with life and how we move forward in a positive way.
Awesome. I'll just interrupt here for a sec. There was Tanjo shared a good thought in the chat, which was that when she can't sleep due to stress, she holds her breath, thinks of one thing she's grateful for, breathes out, and repeats until she drifts off to sleep. So I thought that was a really good thought. Paul, maybe we'll go to you for a question in French. Alors, on discute des choses qu'on peut avoir du contrôle dessus et puis celles qu'on ne peut pas. Alors, comment est-ce qu'on peut concentrer sur les choses qu'on peut contrôler? So I think in the Stephen Covey world, we talk about the big rocks and the things that are within your power to change and not within your power to change. Alors, so how do you focus on things you can change? Comment est-ce qu'on peut avoir la focus sur les choses qu'on peut contrôler?
Oui. Je l'ai abordé un petit peu tantôt. Je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de choses. Il y a beaucoup de choses qu'on ne peut pas changer. Il y en a beaucoup aussi qu'on peut changer, mais qui exigent un niveau de sacrifice personnel incroyable pour pouvoir le faire. Et donc, je pense que j'ai parlé tantôt de l'exemple de l'activiste. Par rapport à un sujet donné. Donc, quelqu'un qui va aller faire des manifestations puis qui va se mettre, vraiment, là, qui va s'investir dans cette cause-là, c'est très différent de quelqu'un qui croit en la même chose, mais qui fait valoir ça par un vote quand il va voter. Et donc, c'est de chacun décider, OK, à quel point est-ce que moi, je suis prêt à me sacrifier pour cette cause-là ou cette chose-là. Et donc, quand on regarde la situation, on se dit, OK, est-ce que ça vaut vraiment la peine que j'investisse de l'énergie émotive comme ça prendrait pour changer la chose? Et donc là, c'est venir à une décision de choisir finalement où on investit son temps. Parce que comme Pauline a dit, we have one shot, one life. Le temps est précieux, n'est-ce pas? Alors, faut choisir où on investit notre temps, faire preuve, il y a la fameuse prière de sérénité qui s'imbrique très bien avec ça, puis je suis pas quelqu'un qui est religieux en tant que tel, mais c'est une prière que je trouve très intéressante, c'est donnez-moi la sérénité d'accepter les choses que je ne peux changer, le courage de changer les choses que je peux et la sagesse d'en connaître la différence. Et donc, c'est ça le plus important, c'est d'avoir la sagesse de connaître la différence entre les choses qu'on peut changer, qu'on ne peut pas changer. Il y a des choses qu'on souhaiterait pouvoir changer, mais à un moment donné, il faut revenir et se dire, OK, oui, je pourrais le changer, mais il faudrait que je me sacrifie en tabarouette. Alors,
voilà. Oui, je pense qu'on va discuter cela sur le chat de Leaders GC cette semaine par rapport à les limites du travail et comment on peut définir ces limites. So I think on the Leaders GC chat this week, we'll be discussing some of that in terms of the limits that you can have. You might be able to make a huge impact and work 70 hours a week and burn yourself out. But the cost of that might be that you're off for 3 months or your own mental health and well-being has taken that hit. So the next question, so I'll encourage all our participants to use the Q&A function if they have any questions or to add their questions in the chat. And I see actually we do have let's see. no. We have some comments in the chat, but no questions at this point. Alors, Wagenda a partagé que certains d'entre nous n'ont pas le choix et droit d'investir son temps dans plusieurs causes. So not all of us have the opportunity to invest our time in multiple causes, and I think that's a strain for all of us. You know, we all have many things that we want to do in our lives, but we have 168 hours a week to do that. Yeah, certainly, I think we all want to make the biggest impact that we can throughout our lives, but there are limits there. A question from Ariane has just come up for Pauline. How is the Mental Health Commission reacting to this virtual workplace? So are there virtual trainings that are being provided?
Thank you. That's a great question. So I've been with the commission now 5 weeks, or this is my 5th week, but have been working arm's length with them, training for quite a number of years. So when COVID happened, everything that was planned face-to-face was of course delayed, canceled, rescheduled, that kind of thing. They pivoted very quickly with their internal learning specialists and their operations group and created a crisis response course that I was able to help deliver from April on. And there were hundreds of courses. I think we trained over 4,000 Canadians over the course of, like, I want to say it was 14 weeks. That's the number that's coming up in my head. But now, during that time when we were delivering these crisis courses, they have taken the Working Mind training and developed that onto an online virtual platform where we have now upskilled all the trainers across, well, not all the trainers, but some of the trainers across Canada. We're still working to update everyone. I think we have over 700 facilitators across the country. So we are in the process of updating everyone to be able to facilitate these online virtual face-to-face courses. The other thing that is happening is they're now redoing all of the training materials to be delivered virtually. So the TIM one, the Inquiring Mind, is already being delivered virtually across Canada. The Working Mind is being delivered across Canada. The Working Mind First Responder will be coming by the end of the year. Next month, we start training on the other program, Mental Health First Aid. That is now also going to be delivered virtually as well. So there has been a mountain amount of work that has been done by all of the ops folks and learning specialists, and everyone has been full steam ahead, and they're all working virtually. So I joined and onboarded with this job virtually, which was a very strange experience for me. But we check in every day. So there's things that we do now that, instead of walking down the hall and grabbing a coffee in the kitchen or meeting around the water cooler as one used to do, we specifically book time every day to meet for coffee together as a group. And this group of individuals has just absolutely been stellar in reprogramming quickly and effectively so that the training material can be delivered in a way that is meaningful, interactive, and supported, because some of what we talk about can be very challenging for people taking the courses. Sometimes the first time someone attends one of our trainings is the first time they've had a conversation about mental health. So that can bring up some strong feelings and emotions for folks. And how do you manage that in the virtual setting? So we have also adopted a set of protocols to make sure that our participants are safe. We now work in, we have a facilitator and a producer or moderator who helps us with all the technical stuff behind the scenes and all the Zoom fanciness and all the breakout rooms and all that kind of stuff, but also to check in on participants. So if someone turns their camera off or they're not responding, we're going to be checking in on them to make sure that they're okay.
That's amazing.
Oh, yes. So I have the chat open and I'm seeing that somebody has asked about mental health first aid. Yes, the trainers, all the folks who train that program are going to be starting the upskill in October. So probably by the end of October, you'll start seeing virtual courses.
That's great. No, and I think you answered that proactively, which was impressive. So that was great. I think that that sounds like a really great best practice too, to do like a daily virtual coffee check-in, because certainly I think that's something that people are struggling with in terms of being virtual and then sort of being sort of Zoom meeting to death in terms of, being in back-to-back meetings, but without an opportunity really to connect in terms of that social sort of non-based on deliverable type of discussion. Alors, je pense que c'est une très bonne pratique de penser d'un café virtuel à chaque jour avec votre équipe. Alia, I'll ask you the next question. So how are you staying hopeful and compassionate with others and with yourself in these times?
That's a great question. It also requires a little bit of self-reflection on my part. So just off the top of my head, honestly, I think being able to work from home, which I was doing pre-COVID, but on a part-time basis, but now that I'm able to do it on a full-time basis, I'm really kind of being confronted with some of the issues that I didn't have before, mainly sharing a space with family who normally aren't in the house, right, when I am. And in going through this, I was able to, and we're all kind of finding our groove and finding tools or moving around or doing what we need to do to get here. And I found that, first of all, everyone understands. So it's not even the compassion, it's, being somebody who's an empath as it is, and then having that moment where people are saying all the things that I'm feeling. It really kind of brings us all to this level of like, we're all human. We're all trying to find our groove, and we need to forgive ourselves, right? And I think that's a big one, is in order to even be able to move forward, to find the positive or to be hopeful, is that common ground that we're all in the same place, so we can kind of have these goals together, or we're not in it alone. I'm big on the power of community, so I feel like when for example, I'm involved with something called One Team Gov. I'm not sure how many people are familiar with it, but it's a grassroots group of public servants across jurisdictions. So not just the federal public service, but sort of there are different chapters around the world, actually. So for Canada chapter, we started in the very early days of COVID. And when March hit, we said, hey, let's have these virtual calls, but let's have them every day, just for people to have a place to come and pop on. And this was before, MS Teams was rolled out everywhere and things were normalized to have that. And we didn't get into video sort of burden because it was needed. And that was a time we came together and shared stories and talked about what we were feeling and saying, I'm having a really crappy day. My dog did this, or my child puked here, or whatever it was. And we shared. And I think when you bring that humanness into what you do, you're able to see that you're going to get through this. You're going to have that hope that, everyone's in this together and we're working together to do better, right? And to be better and stronger, I guess, together, which is, I know, the slogan or the hashtag for COVID before, but for off the top of my head, that's kind of where I'm at, is I think just removing that feeling of isolation, because it can be really isolating working from home, but knowing that everyone's kind of feeling the same thing is helpful.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, next question for you. Alors, en français, que signifie être résilient dans le contexte actuel? So what does it mean to be resilient in today's context?
Personnellement, je trouve que c'est la même chose que dans un contexte ordinaire, dans le sens que, je veux dire, là, on est dans une situation de crise. Je pense que dans nos vies, tristement, la plupart d'entre nous vont faire face à de telles situations. Donc, c'est de revenir encore une fois au cercle de contrôle, de déterminer qu'est-ce que moi je peux contrôler, qu'est-ce que moi je peux faire au quotidien pour pallier à ça. Je veux dire, exemple, les outils technologiques, c'est pas partout que les gens en ont qui sont optimales, disons. Alors, si tu n'as pas disons, une installation optimale, alors on fait avec. Ça sert à rien de se fâcher contre ça, n'est-ce pas? Je reviens un petit peu à, comme je disais tantôt, ça devient une perte d'énergie émotive. Donc, c'est vraiment de trouver des moyens fixer ses limites, bien sûr. Je veux dire, si on a des enfants à s'occuper, on doit en faire part à nos collègues, puis aux gens avec qui on travaille. Puis il faut garder les gens au courant de nos réalités. Ceci s'applique aussi avec les conjoints. Je sais que pendant une partie, au début, j'étais je subissais une pression virtuelle que ma conjointe n'était, sans dire qu'elle n'était pas au courant, je pense pas qu'elle appréciait l'envergure de cette pression-là. Et donc, étant donné que je ne lui communiquais pas exactement c'est quoi qui se passait dans mon petit monde d'ordinateur, ben, ça crée un petit peu de ressentiment des fois. Et donc, pour pouvoir rester dans un état, disons, sain, c'est de communiquer autant avec les membres de sa famille que les collègues au travail, de dire vraiment qu'est-ce qui se passe dans nos vies, c'est quoi les obstacles auxquels on fait face, les difficultés qu'on a. Et le simple fait de partager ça, de parler de compassion là, avec Alia, je pense qu'on fait... Disons que la compassion pour quelqu'un qui travaille à la maison, puis les enjeux que cela amène, on est beaucoup plus à l'affût de ça, collectivement. Donc, je ne sais pas si ça a du sens comme réponse.
Ouais, absolument. Ouais, et puis, just to say that, I think what you said is very key, that, the pressures have changed. And that's the difference. But the general, sort of practices and solutions that you can put in place are the same. It's just that it's a very different situation with COVID. I think on last week's session we talked about that self-compassion element of that in the federal government, people haven't lost their jobs for the most part. Like there aren't mass layoffs or anything that have happened. But going to the grocery store and wearing a mask and fearing that you're going to contract a potentially deadly disease is not the same as it was in early February. So having that self-compassion is certainly key. Pauline, a question for you. So how do I start the conversation if I'm struggling with staying resilient? I guess this could both be, how do you kind of voice those thoughts yourself of dealing with your own resilience, but how do you kind of talk about that with your colleagues, with your partner, to kind of voice those concerns?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very challenging one. So I'm going to use myself as an example because I like doing that because I can't offend anyone because it's me. So at the beginning of this pandemic, so at the beginning of 2019 is when I left the paramedic world. And it is quite a difference not being involved at that level anymore. So in the past, when we had SARS and H1N1 and Ebola and all these really big deal things that we were dealing with from a first responder perspective. And then of course there are local things that happen, and the role that I was in, you are constantly fed information. There are, briefings daily, sometimes twice a day. We had the was it the G20 summit here back in 2010, I think it was, which I was the 2IC for that from the paramedic service. So you are constantly fed information, what you need to know, and you sort that out. And so for me, when this pandemic started, I didn't have that because I was no longer in paramedic service. So there was a real big void that I felt from an information perspective. And I made a mistake by watching the news a lot, by reading everything I could get my hands on, by continually checking outward on all of my, paramedic and policing and fire peeps and making sure that they were okay and what do you need and how can I help and what am I doing in my community. And it led to me becoming very overwhelmed and realizing that I wasn't okay. I wasn't taking care of myself properly. I wasn't eating properly. I was not sleeping. So I realized that I, was seeing the signs in myself that I was moving what we call along the mental health continuum towards the red or not as well as I used to be. It's part of what we teach with this program in the commission. And I realized I was moving along the continuum, but the benefit of having the training and having taught this material over years is that I know that it's not a one-way street. And when we are feeling this way, and when we are in a dark place, or when, the odds seem insurmountable, there is a way back. So we have to get back to the tools and the things that help us, whether it's mindfulness, journaling, reaching out to a trusted friend, or an anonymous helpline if you're not comfortable speaking with the people you're connected with, because not everybody is in a safe place. So what I would say, if anybody is struggling, how do you start that conversation? You have to take some deep breaths and know from the bottom of your feet that you matter in this world, and you contribute and you make a difference, and you have worth and value. So because of all of that, invest in yourself, just like you would reach out to help someone else. What would you do if a friend came to you who was struggling? If you think about it in that way, okay, well, what would I do for that friend? What am I going to do for me? Right? Do I have someone who can support me? So I don't have a perfect answer for that, but what I'm saying is that definitely reach out and connect with someone.
Absolutely. No, I think that was a great way to bring us to towards the end of our session. Before we finish off, though, I will hand it over to Alia, who has some final thoughts on today's topic.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what we've thrown at you today, it's a lot to take in. And it was less than an hour because we spent the rest of the time in Q&A. So please don't hesitate if you have questions to reach out to look at the resources on your own time. And regardless of everything going on, don't put pressure on yourself to become resilient that I have to do this. You need to forgive yourselves. You need to really cut yourself some slack, what you're going through. And this word unprecedented, I know we hear it all the time, but, working from home and going through all the things, plus COVID, plus just 2020, let's be honest, 2020 has been really sucky. So forgive yourselves, take that break, take a step back. And when you're ready, start your resiliency journey, and it's going to look different for all of you. Don't hesitate to reach out. Passing it back to Josh. Thank you all. You've been great. And I really am enjoying the definitions and things I'm seeing. So the chat's been awesome. So good on you.
Awesome. That's great. So we're at the end of our time. So a huge thanks to Pauline and Paul and Alia for joining us today, sharing your experience, sharing your thoughts, sharing your resources. Merci à Pauline et Paul et Alia pour partager votre expérience et puis vos ressources par rapport à cet sujet. So thanks as well to our participants coming to us from across Canada, and for sharing, as Alia mentioned, your thoughts and experience in the chat space as well. So certainly not the last session we'll have around this sort of resilience topic, and definitely look forward to future discussions on this. In the chat space as well, you'll find the links to the next sessions. So this is the second part of a 6-part series with FlexGC. And so we will have weekly sessions on Tuesdays with FlexGC going forward to really give you those resources and tools to keep a check on your own mental health and well-being, and stay sane during these COVID times for sure. Alors merci à tous nos participants, merci à nos panélistes, and have a great day everyone. Bonne journée à tous. Merci.